I'm going to do the whole YouTube talking at 1.5 speed thing, so try. If you're watching this on YouTube later, I apologise, just go back to normal speed. And I'm going to take my notes because I've got some revised timings on here and a few things to cut out. So, thanks for coming. I did consider a bit more of a clickbaity title, something like 38 career hacks for geeks, number 7 will amaze you. But you know, the idea really is that I'm going to give you my advice for what it's worth on how to make yourself as attractive as possible to the sorts of companies that you want to work for. Now, I'm not a magician. I can't get you jobs or help you get jobs that you're not qualified for. There are, of course, other ways of achieving that. But I will talk about plenty of quick fixes that you can make to your CV or to your interview style. But mainly, I'm talking about things that are sort of ways of thinking differently about your career goals and what you prioritise to get a different mindset to help you succeed. So what qualifies me to talk to you about this? Well, I'm one of those hiring managers in one of those companies. I'm the CTO of a fintech startup called Kudu. It's one of the Glenham Chalcott ventures. I was the founder CTO of Oakbrook Finance for 5 years, a company that's done a lot of tech hiring locally, and I've been in hiring positions in large respected tech teams for quite a few years. I insist on interviewing everyone myself in the first interview, and as a result I've interviewed hundreds of people, hundreds of software professionals, and I've seen probably thousands of CVs. And I think I've got a pretty good track record. I mean, I see there's a few faces here of people that have had the pleasure or displeasure of sitting in a room with me for an hour being interviewed. But there's very, very, very few hires that I regret. So my talk the title mentions making yourself attractive to the best companies. Well, what do I mean by that? I don't necessarily mean the ones that pay the most or the ones that have got the most recognisable name. Those guys can be pretty soulless or cutthroat places where they talk a good game about their tech, but in reality you're little more than a cog in a corporate machine. So I'm talking about the gems, the places where you are really valued as a software professional. And what you do is sort of really respected, where you've got the opportunity to learn and grow, and they have happy, engaged teams making awesome software. And I've worked in all of those things, and believe you me, you want to be working in those awesome smaller teams or tech-focused teams. Now, the first clue is that they often call themselves software companies. These are the places that value great software and great software engineers. Now, there may be lots of good things to be said for writing software for a bank, top-tier bank, or a global manufacturing company, or a funeral director, or whoever. I'm sure many of those are very pleasant places to work, but if you're really hungry to create awesome software and write awesome code, and you want to work in a place where your colleagues and your boss and your boss's boss truly understand what it means to engineer great solutions, then you should probably be thinking about applying for jobs in software teams, software companies, or innovative tech companies. The other part of the title talks about getting those companies fighting to hire you. Industry legend Joel Spolsky says that he's looking for people with just 2 qualities. Smart and gets things done. So this talk is about how to hit those 2 sweet spots. So I'm going to talk to you about some of your career goals, as I said, also about how to get the interview, and then how to nail the interview and the tech test. So, bear with me here. Some of these things might seem a bit abstract at first, but hopefully you'll start to see the relevance of them as we go through. So, I'm going to ask you to take pride in being a professional. So what does that mean? We're a very young industry, but in a ridiculously short timescale, we have seen how the modern world has come to rely on software and the people writing that software very, very quickly. So the idea that software faults could make the world's economies go into meltdown, or national grid blackouts happen, or cars crashing into trees, that was fanciful just a few years ago. Just yesterday, Twitter had something like $2 billion wiped off its share value because of an innocuous seeming bug that meant that the targeting algorithm for its advertising wasn't working effectively. It went unspotted for several months. So the truth is that just about every aspect of what we do now relies on someone just like you not screwing up. But our industry hasn't actually kept pace with that. So think about this. Anyone can work in software development if you can talk your way into a job. There's no minimum qualifications, no universally recognised professional certifications. Now you can't become a brain surgeon or a dentist or a pilot or a vet or a teacher or a lawyer without meeting certain minimum qualifications. But you know, if you went to the dentist, you'd be a bit worried about going if you didn't know whether that dentist was only working there because they'd nailed the interview on the day. But the truth is that when in software development, literally anyone could apply for those jobs. As an aside on that, I did hear the other day that when they launched the first fully fly-by-wire aeroplane, the 777, they made the software engineering managers sit on the test flight, and I imagine that sort of helped focus their minds during the QA phase. Now, don't get me wrong, it is great that our industry is sort of finally being seen as sexy. I mean, we've all waited long enough for that, right? But it's also great that people are retraining and coming in to help fill the sort of skills shortage. And the flip side is, having a computer science degree does also not mean you're a competent developer. I've seen plenty that aren't. Also, not all software jobs are created equal. If you're writing colourful apps for toddlers, it's not the same thing as writing nuclear control sort of systems for power plants. But I am urging you to become amongst the true sort of professionals in your industry, amongst that minority. So that doesn't just mean not turning up to work drunk, it means professional in the sense of understanding that you have got serious, formal accountabilities that go with your job. Take your craft seriously. Take the time to learn about the practices that some of the leading lights in our industry write about, such as formal software design practices. Now, you may have heard the term boy or girl scouting in the context of code. Well, take that up a notch. Think about it on an industry level. Try to leave the industry in a better state than how you found it. So how do you do that? Well, you can start by having a side hustle or two. Now, there's no better way of keeping your skills sharp and in the habit of solving problems than having something that you're personally invested in. Build an app, run a community website, contribute to an open source project. Find something that you're passionate and spend time working on that. And it might one day make you lots of money, or it might not. Be part of your local tech community. So you're already here, which is great. But if you're not already, go to some meetups. Take part in Hack 24. Now, as you sit there in your second or third meetup, you should start feeling a burning obligation to be up there at a future event, giving one of those talks. If that idea fills you with horror, then use that feeling to motivate yourself to learn something that other people want to know about, and sort of learn those skills, practice those skills of standing up in front of a room and talking to people, because that will also be a very, very valuable career skill. Also, be part of your online community, the online tech community. That should be top of your list. So don't just be a passive consumer of other people's solutions on Stack Overflow. It's not their job to solve your problem. Pay it forward. Every time you find an answer to something on Stack Overflow, think about how you can give something back. You can start by just thanking them for their answer and maybe giving an example that helped, how it helped you. But then maybe you could find somebody else who's had a similar problem and see if you can answer that for them. Start seeking out people who also have problems that you can solve. Think of it as the equivalent of voluntary work. It'll feel good, you're giving something back, and it's worth a try. Also contribute to open source projects. Now, if you found an NPM package that you found particularly useful, has it got any bugs in it? Could you see little ways of improving it? Could the README file be a bit clearer? Then put in a PR, even something really small, because somebody made that package out of a labour of love for you. So pay it forward, give it back. Practice your core skills. So if you're a professional tennis player, you would be practicing your backhand hundreds of times a day. If you're a professional musician, you'd be practicing your scales and your arpeggios. But as a developer, you can practice your skills too. You can do online coding katas, for example. Try Code Wars if you like your practice gamified. And in general, keep learning. Make reading tech material a regular habit. Honestly, if you haven't read a textbook since leaving university, then force yourself back into it. If that's not your sort of dead trees aren't your preferred reading style or learning style, there's tons and tons of online courses available for next to nothing now. I use an app called Feedly, which gives me a feed of interesting articles every day. I just pick up a few of those and read something through when I've got a few minutes to spare. Now this is really important. Adjacent practices. Now I love meeting a really naturally talented coder. But what I love meeting more is a talented coder who has reached the point in their career where they realise that there is more to it than just writing code. They understand that well-rounded, well-engineered solutions are something else. Now, if you think about what makes someone a good driver, they don't just understand how the pedals and the steering wheel work. They understand about road systems, about traffic laws, about road signs. They understand about different weather conditions and how you should change your drive to accommodate that. They understand a little bit about the psychology of other drivers. They understand in a danger situation, should you give way or should you accelerate? And these things come with experience. But these are the sorts of things that, as a developer, you want to at least know something about all the kind of adjacent practices that make you a great engineer. You need to know about continuous integration and delivery. You need to know about test practices and frameworks. You need to know about debugging skills. You need to know about cloud architectures, about domain-driven design, about monitoring, about agile methodologies, about different version control workflows. There's a whole range of different adjacent practices that you should be thinking about. And that's really what distinguishes a sort of a junior, competent developer from somebody who's much more experienced and rounded in the industry. Soft skills. There's the obvious stuff like presenting and writing clear emails, and there's loads written about that. But also, if you've never done one, try an online personality test. It'll tell you something about yourself that you didn't already know. I'm not actually a big believer in these things, or I didn't think I was a big believer in these things, but I did one, and I learned that people didn't conceptualize information in the way that I do. And so I addressed that, and suddenly I was getting through to people that I didn't realise weren't taking on board what I was telling them. Seek and give help. So do you think Roger Federer doesn't take tennis lessons from a coach? Well, he does. Find someone who you respect and ask them for their advice. Ask them if you can sit with them and understand what they're doing. Ask if they'll sit with you and critique what you're writing or critique your way of thinking about something. Don't be so arrogant to think that you already know it all and you don't need to ask for help from others. Now, you can also give something back. Everybody has got something to offer. Everybody, literally. So if you don't feel comfortable going to your colleagues and imparting your wisdom to them, do it online. Blog about something that you care about. Go back to the Stack Overflow thing I talked about before. You can even stream yourself coding on Twitch. Yes, that is a thing. Teaching also helps you develop your empathy muscles, and it's a great way of learning stuff yourself. So, final one in this section, develop a point of view. I'm going to say this a few times. Now, by this I mean, as part of a global community of software developers or engineers, you should have opinions about things. So, is this latest JavaScript framework the silver bullet that everyone says it is, or is it just an iteration on the last one? Why is everyone using MongoDB these days? Is that a good thing? Should developers operate in an ethical framework? What about functional programming? Where's that going? Is it the future? Microservices versus monoliths. What are the pros and cons? Is blockchain the future of cat memes or something? So take time to connect the dots between all these different opinions that you develop and talk about them with your colleagues in the first instance. Now, if you ever use Twitter, you'll know that individual rants are boring, but somebody having a point of view based on trends observed over time and multiple data points is interesting. So develop a point of view, because not only will it help you in your job, it will give you something to blog about, and it'll give you something to talk about in interviews. Okay, so I gave you some opinions there on what you should be prioritising as career goals. I spent time talking about that because those are the things that really matter to me and that I value when I'm hiring. I want to see that you take your craft seriously. Now that doesn't count for much if you can't get the interview, so here we go. So it's an uncomfortable truth that people reading CVs will make snap judgments. If I've got 5 CVs on my desk, there are some that will draw my eye. So, also, think about this. Do the most attractive do the most attractive and well-heeled people stay single for long? If they are single, do they say, are they always on Tinder looking for new dates? The same sort of rule applies to hiring, believe it or not. So surprise, surprise, the best people tend to always be in a job. They get snapped up from university, from their placement company. They then get poached by a client company. They go off and found another company with their mates, and they're rarely actually looking for a new job. The best companies know this already, so they hire with that in mind. So they don't need the hassle of advertising jobs and then getting floods and floods of CVs in. They use agencies to headhunt. They will rely on staff referrals. They'll go to events like this, hang out and try and connect with people that way. They'll go to university fairs and they'll try and snag those bright sparks before they even realise there's such a thing as a jobs market. So the first thing you need to know, agencies are not your mortal enemy. I've heard some pretty stupid opinions in the past from tech people convinced that agencies are all charlatans and money-grabbing scoundrels. Now, some are, of course, but most are not. Most of them are just people like you and I trying to earn a living. But even if they just do see you with a dollar sign, that's even more of a reason to work with them rather than against them. So play nice with the agencies. They often have exclusive hiring arrangements. And what's really important to know is that because I work with the agencies as a hiring manager to help them understand what I'm looking for, if they send me a CV, and I will always look at that because I know that they've screened it according to my criteria. Often their client will often be anonymous in the advert, so that's another way to realise you can get through some of the better companies through those agencies. And don't sneer when agencies turn up at events like this or sponsor events like this. If anything, make a note of who they are and go and buy them a pint later, because they're the ones who are smart enough to realise that this is where the best of the techies hang out, and they are therefore going to have a higher hit rate in finding good people. So as a hiring manager, I'm more likely to work with one of the agencies that sponsors an event like this because I know that they're doing that. So be polite and friendly with them, don't mess them about and don't mess about their clients. If you don't like the job they're calling you about, don't tell them to F off because next month they might have one that you are interested in. When you do speak to the agency, treat that call as your first interview. Sell yourself, tell them about your side hustles, tell them about the things that make you memorable when they call me and say, Neil, I've got an awesome candidate, you're going to want to speak to them, because I'm going to sit up and take notice when I get that call. Okay, so if you were hiring, where would you do it? So I talked about hiring on the tech scene. This is why you should another reason why you should hang out on the tech scene, because often the best people will, like you guys, will be already on the tech scene, and if you are regularly turning up to meetups and events, then the really good way to actually get noticed is through the whole staff referral group. If you become mates with somebody who comes to one of these events, then they're going to, once they're confident you're not going to make them look stupid, they're going to recommend you to one of the cool places where you will want to work. Okay, so CVs. It's your shop window. Often less is more. If you've been in the industry for 2 years and you've already got a 3-page CV, I promise you it's too big. Now, it's also a bit of a cliche, but have you seen the Marissa Mayer sample CV? It's actually been used to promote a CV writing service a few years ago, but it did capture people's imagination. Now, this is one of the most experienced and accomplished people in our industry, and it's captured everything you need to know about her on one page with a bit of white space. It's a fake, but the point stands. Now, if you think that's nonsense, I can tell you that I've helped a lot of people with their CVs over the years, and the ones that I cut it down to one page are the ones that get the best feedback every time. Also, here's one of those nonsense rules that you'll hear. Don't put your photo on a CV. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't put your photo on the CV unless it's a picture of you throwing up in a bar in Magaluf or something. People like to connect with people on a human level, and it gives you a chance to do that before you get to the interview. Here's something you've got to remember. Your CV will not get you hired. It's not the strength of your CV that gets you hired, but a CV is a screening mechanism, so your bad CV could rule you out. A good CV will just go to the top of the pile. Don't just list out all of the tools and frameworks that you use. It's meaningless. Everybody knows that everyone kind of just lists everything they've heard of. It's become a bit of a joke. I want to know what you've used them for, how you've used them, and maybe give yourself even a rating on each of those tools and frameworks. In your job history, I want to know what you contributed. So even if you're the most junior person in the organisation, I want to know what you did to make it a little bit of a better place, or what you took away from that made you a better engineer or a better person. Consider making a portfolio CV, showcase your skills. Now, you think about this as something that only artists do, for example, but I've seen plenty of other non-creative types make portfolio CVs that are really very good. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Zach, who is sitting right there, is one of my current senior developers. You may have heard him speak brilliantly earlier until he was rudely interrupted. He has made a website CV. Now anybody can do this. Let's try and refresh it. Back looking all coy up there. But you can see that what he's done here is make a really kind of nice example of a interactive web CV. Alright? He's been imaginative. He's kind of done something different. And even though I know that he's got mad React skills, he didn't even build that in React from ground up. He used a template. And he admitted that straight away. And that's fine, because what I'm more interested in is that he's realised that there's a great way of bringing out his attributes in a different way that distinguishes him from other people. And you'll notice he did have his photo on there. Also, you sort of let your personality come out in it. Zach said on the first thing on his line on his CV was that he's super jazzed by front-end frameworks. Now that phrase kind of sounds most ridiculous coming out of my mouth. He's an Aussie, but I didn't know that. But I was talking about that for days. I was laughing about it and telling people this guy said he's super jazzed by front-end frameworks. And he also said he's a mutant code monkey sent from the future on his CV. And they're still hiding. But it turns out it's true, he's a mutant code monkey. So the other thing I did was I've seen was somebody who's applied for a job as a BI developer, and he used data visualization techniques on his CV to show me what skills he employed in each job. But he also showed me that he understood how bringing data to life in visual form was something that he could do, which was, I thought, a really, really clever trick. Okay, so there's nothing. Like you think, well, I'm not a web developer, I'm a back-end developer or whatever. Well, why don't? Let's say you're pretty sort of pleased with your API development skills. So why don't you make a Hatios compliant RESTful API that I can interrogate to learn more about your CV? I don't want that to be the only way of reading your CV, but I've literally never seen anybody do that. And if somebody sent me that, I'd be impressed by the fact that they've gone out of their way to do something different. I knew somebody that applied for a social media marketing role, just a junior one, and she'd laid out her CV like a Twitter conversation, and she got the job. It was a very simple but effective trick. Okay, so also, just remember what the prize is here. A good career move could literally be worth thousands of pounds a year or a month in your pocket, and you could be the difference between a happy career and a shit career. And it's worth investing some time in this. CVs everyone might say, well, a CV is just a CV, but it does matter. And just spending that bit of time getting it right is worth doing. Maybe you can spend a bit of money to pay someone to review it for you. So, from my side of the desk, how do I read a CV? So, firstly, what's the overall impression that it conveys? Is it sort of think and waffle free? If it's 2 pages, I'm likely to read all of it. Any more than that, I'm just going to be skimming for keywords. Is it nicely laid out with plenty of white space and maybe a splash of colour and some bold to draw my eye to certain things? If so, that will help. Are there any spelling mistakes in there? Now, spelling mistakes are bad in general, but if you've misspelt the name of a framework that you're claiming to be an expert on, I'm going to make assumptions about your true expertise in that framework, and you would be surprised how many times that happens. If it's not neat and clean, I'm also going to make assumptions about your self-discipline and your ability to organise and get simple things right. For your education, I'm interested in the university you went to. I'm interested in what degree you did. If you graduated recently, why don't you write a paragraph telling me what you enjoyed the most about the course? If you didn't do a degree, or you did a degree in a non-computing subject, I'm going to look for what you've done since then to give yourself some of those same skills that a formal computing degree would give you. I don't insist on it, but I go a long way in making sure that somebody's got the same sort of level of formal qualifications, even if they've done it in a less formal learning environment. For your job history, I'm most interested in what you did to improve things. What was your contribution in each of those things? If your last or your current job has you've only been in it for a few months, 2 months or something, you better make the explanation convincing as to why you need to leave, because otherwise I'm going to assume that you're about to fail probation. In your job history, I'd rather read that, like one sentence saying, I was only a junior, but I ran a POC of a new CI tool and the team loved it, rather than giving me 3 pages of filler where you tell me about all of the sort of minor things that you did. And I'm going to attach progressively less information to less importance to your previous jobs. I also don't really care whether you've learned leadership skills flipping burgers in a summer job, but if you've been coding since before you could talk, or you have automated your toaster with a Raspberry Pi, tell me about that. That's more interesting to me than the sort of minor responsibilities in previous jobs. Basically, I'm looking for kind of signs that you're motivated by the right things. Do you care about your craft? Do you care about doing things right? Does it look like you're just chasing more money or chasing a senior title? Because that's something I would try to avoid. I also love a good personal statement. Tell me about your interests and hobbies, humanises you. Tell me what gets you excited about tech. Tell me what gets you excited about your projects, about your side hustles, about your community involvement. Remember what I said about your point of view, having that point of view, that theme, that narrative that you believe in as an industry professional. Make sure that comes through in your CV and in your personal statement. I'm also going to be disappointed if I look on your CV and I don't see any side projects, if I don't see any community involvement, if there's not a personal website or a GitHub, I'm going to be disappointed. If there's been a couple of commits in 2017 and nothing since, I'm going to be disappointed. Also, I've had many CVs, more than you would imagine, from people who claim to be web developers or are web developers, and their personal website is awful, sort of thing that our sort of village hall caretaker would be ashamed of writing. Should you write a cover letter? Well, yeah, why not? But make sure it comes across that you've done the research into my company and it's targeted to me. I want to know that you want this job. And also, if you're working with an agency on it, send it through to them. Don't think that means that you can't send a cover letter. You can, and they'll send it to me in the note that they send through. Okay, I'm talking pretty quick here if I'm trying to get through it, but hopefully you get in the sense of what's going on. Okay. So, you have started hitting some of those kind of sweet career goals. You're making a bit of a name for yourself as a bit of a badass in the local tech community. You've crafted that killer CV we've been talking about, and you've got yourself the plum interview you've been looking for. So now what happens? Okay, first of all, do a bit of research, first about the interview. Find out what the interview structure is if you can, particularly whether there's going to be a technical assessment, and what sort of assessment, and we'll come back to that. Try and do some research on the company itself. You don't need to be able to reel off facts about profits and revenues, or what the first office dog was called, but you should at least be able to describe in a sentence or two what my company does and why you find that super interesting. Find out who is interviewing you. Do a bit of research on them and whether they, how technical they are, whether they, look at their previous jobs, see how technical they appear to be in those, but don't attempt to connect with them on LinkedIn. Have a look on Glassdoor. You'll find some good information about the culture of companies on there, but sometimes there'll also be tips about reports that people have had given on the interview and how that went. Prepare some answers to behavioural questions. Now, these are the sorts of things about how you handle yourself in certain situations, and they're straight out of the corporate interview playbook. And you can train yourself to answer these better. So start by finding a list online, make bullet points about those, and then against each one of these, write down what your sort of answers are, what your kind of key points that you want to get across, and then practice those, rehearse those, get someone to ask you, get a friend to ask you those questions. Just make sure you remember those bullet point answers. Because the main thing here, rather than sort of giving them the answer they want to hear, which is what everybody thinks you're supposed to do in behavioural questions, it's not. What you need to do is use these as an opportunity to sell things that you want to talk about. So if you want to sort of, let's say you ask a question like, how do you deal with conflict? One of these kind of standard things. So rather than saying, something bland like inoffensive, like, I definitely try not to raise my voice, or I'm a black belt in Krav Maga or something. Instead, use it as an opportunity to say something like, right, okay, I've practiced this question. Right, there was a situation where we had to choose between SQL Server and a NoSQL database. And this other guy in the team was really set on using Mongo. I wasn't sure, so I went away and I prepared a pitch for using a relational database. I then arranged some time with our boss, and we then pitched both options, and then we reached a conclusion. Something along those lines. Now, the thing is, you might think, well, that didn't happen. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me if that exact scenario didn't actually play out the way you've described it. As an interviewer, I don't know that. And I've asked you, the most important thing to me is that I've asked you a question, you've engaged with it, you've used it as an opportunity to bring something out about your own skills. It might lead to a conversation about a technical topic like database selection. And for the behavioural part, I've learned that you realise the importance of not bringing a knife to a fist fight, and so everybody's happy. Some of the prep you should do: read your own CV before you go in. Now, this is partly to remind yourself how awesome you are, but also to remind yourself what you put on there. You will not believe the number of times that I've asked somebody about something that they claim to be an expert on their CV, and they go, "Oh, no, I've never used that." And as you can imagine, those interviews didn't last very long. One interview lasted literally like 2 minutes because they claimed to be an expert on it, and then he said never used it. It's like, why are you here? Okay, a few pieces of advice worth listening to. As you prepare for the interview, write down the key projects that you've worked on over the last few years. Then write down what your contribution was to that to make it a success. Write down what you learned from that project. Now, that might all seem a bit over the top because you'll think, well, I know that, I was there, I was involved. But the act of writing something down accesses a different part of your brain and makes you much more likely to remember it when you're asked about it. It forces you to structure your thoughts about it. So then you'll be able to, when asked, crisply and eloquently describe what your contribution was to that project and what you took from that. Next thing, can you draw it? Can you draw the architecture of a project, let's say your last project, in maybe 60 seconds? You would not believe, again, how many times I will ask somebody to draw something that they are supposedly like a key contributor to, and then you put a marker pen in their hand and a blank whiteboard in front of them, and they turn into a complete blithering idiot. It could be stage fright, but what comes across is that they have never attempted to describe their system to another human being before. Now you might think, that's okay, I can do that. I've sort of, I know what my architecture is, but as soon as you try to put that together in boxes and arrowed lines, it will all fall apart. So think about the project that you really want to talk about, plan ahead, practice drawing that diagram, and practice again. It might be a physical architecture diagram, a logical system diagram, it might be a sequence diagram, it might be a data flow diagram, it might be whatever. It might be a use case diagram. It depends on what your job is, and it depends on what points you want to get across, but it needs to come across to the interviewer that it comes very naturally to you to be able to explain about the workings of that system. Another thing, you'll often be asked, if you had a do-over, what would you do differently? So you can think about this one in advance as well. So knowing what you know now, would you choose different tools? Would you choose different architectural patterns? Would you put a greater emphasis on non-functional aspects, maybe performance testing or monitoring? Why did that not happen first time around? Was it an oversight, or did somebody not have sharp enough arguments to management? So this is not just so you can prepare a well-rehearsed answer. In fact, actually going through this process of asking yourself these questions will make you realise, actually, maybe I should have thought about that, and then that'll force you to go off and learn a bit more about some of those other things. So you're training yourself to learn from your own mistakes, or from somebody else's mistakes that you sort of saw firsthand. That you'll often get asked that in an interview, especially after you've just drawn a diagram, and surprisingly, large number of people have never thought about it at that point. So those last few things that I just told you to pay attention to were about demonstrating that you can see the bigger picture. You can move comfortably between the abstract and concrete details of a project, and you can demonstrate ownership, and you can demonstrate personal accountability to that by being able to describe, visualise and reflect upon the project that you're working on. They'll help me as an interviewer get confident in your ability to contribute to my team if you join it. Okay, that was for interview prep before you go to the interview. Now these are a few words about the interview itself. Now I won't dwell on this because there's loads of online advice about this stuff, but a few quick pointers. Turn up on time. I once had a guy turn up about 10-15 minutes late. I said, could you not find us? Oh yeah, I could find you. Oh, have you come a long way? No, I just live around the corner. So, bad impression from the off. Be polite and professional. So even if you know that they've got a very casual dress sense at that company, that's not a reason to turn up in your sort of favourite 20-year-old Napalm Death t-shirt. Little things like that matter. I once interviewed a guy who, for the whole interview, he had his bag open between us, and all I could see for the interview was that he had one condom sitting proudly at the top of the bag, ribbed. Now, I still wonder how he thought that interview was going to pan out. So, ask them about the tech culture. They should be selling you on the tech culture and what they do to sort of give you the opportunity to learn, to share information and knowledge with your colleagues. But it'll impress them if you ask about it. Sort of questions you shouldn't ask are the ones that make you sound like a job doer. So if you're going to ask somebody if you can finish at 4 p.m. every day, you may already be talking yourself out of that job. So even if you do have reasons like childcare commitments or something like that, it's much better to bring this up once you've got an offer, because they'll be much more psychologically committed to you by then, and they'll be much more likely to accommodate. Otherwise, you're sending them a message that you're going to be a bit of a thorn in their side. Remember that they want you to succeed. In most cases, they will be willing you to do well. So, if I've already filtered out dozens of CVs and I've already interviewed loads of other people, I want you to come in and do well. I'm not trying to make you fail. So take that positive mindset into the interview and make sure that you bear that in mind. Now there are bad interviewers. Some people make, I said at the start that people make snap judgments, and sometimes that will work against you. You get different types of bad interviewers. You get the ones that seem to be trying to make you feel small, perhaps because they've got marital problems. You get the ones that just persist with the same question over and over again. You think, what are they trying to get to? I don't really know what they're trying to get from me. You get the one who just talks about themselves the whole time. You'll get the one who is super friendly but doesn't ask you anything very probing, so you can't really get your best across. Now, the best thing you can do in these types of cases is just be polite and patient, and look for the opportunities, like the little openings in the interview, where you can take it in the direction that you want to take it. An interview, you're not a passive participant in an interview. I talked before about preparing bullet points, preparing your thoughts about your projects and so on, preparing thoughts about your strengths and weaknesses, because you will get those little opportunities at the most unexpected times. You don't want to be kicking yourself as you walk out the door that you should have said something. If you prepare them, even in a bad interview, you will get those little opportunities. So speaking about bad interviewers, you do unfortunately get otherwise sane people still asking you things like, how many grains of sand are there in the Sahara, or if you were reincarnated as a kitchen utensil, what would it be? one guy on my team was apparently once asked to talk about a rock that was placed on the desk in front of him for 5 minutes. Now, I do admit I have tried questions like these in the past. They might tell me something about your sense of humour. They might tell me something about your reasoning skills. Probably not. But play them with a straight bat, because they probably think it's a really clever question, and if you just laugh in their face, you're going to insult them. But they're not very clever questions. Okay, so repeat a few points here, but these are the things that are about acing the interview, rather than just delivering a sort of an okay interview. I keep talking about having that point of view. Don't be afraid to let that come out. Like, set the tone, take the initiative in the interview and set a narrative that the interview can follow. A common theme around which you can build your answers. So let's say you're really passionate about automating the build pipeline. That could be a thing that you've been kind of focused on in your last job. Let that come out. Talk about that. Explain why it matters to you, explain the benefits of it, and then build your subsequent answers around that central point of view. It's really great when somebody comes into it with an opinion and a kind of demonstrates some personal knowledge and some personal passion about a certain topic, and they can speak passionately and informatively about that topic. Listen to their questions and try and answer them, obviously, but then use those questions as your springboards to get across the things that you want to talk about. Think of it like the tennis player that receives a kind of a fast serve and then they return it back with extra power and a bit of spin on top, using the power of the serve to get what you want to achieve. Expect the unexpected. That again sounds like an awful cliche, but it's the same point that even if you feel like you've given a mediocre question, because a mediocre answer to a question that you haven't prepared for, if you prepared those little nuggets of information about yourself, those little topics that you want to talk about, then you'll find opportunities in the unexpected questions to talk about things that you want to talk about. So I'm just going to reiterate that point about just practice little phrases, practice little examples of where your own projects have given you insight, and you'll find opportunities, I promise you, in the interviews to bring those things up. Be a bit British, by which I mean try to balance your confidence with a bit of humility. We like people who are capable and intelligent, but don't like to show off about it. So a bit of self-deprecating humour can go a long way when used judiciously. You want to give them the message that I've got this, but I don't take myself too seriously, because that sends a signal that other people will go along with you as well. Now, if you're going for a senior role, I read a really good article the other day about what companies are looking for whether they realise it or not when they say that they're looking for a senior. They firstly want somebody who's a skilled mentor. It's not about just bringing those sort of skills, you need to be able to transfer those skills to other people. They want someone who's an accelerator. You make things go faster. Everyone thinks that their dev team is going too slowly, so they want somebody who's going to speed things up rather than slow things down. They're always looking at ways of improving things. Do they bring perspective? So that can come with experience, but also it just comes from every time you learn something, understanding that gives you new insights. Don't be afraid to jump up and talk about your project in a visual way. That will give the interviewer a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that you've got a handle on the big picture. Also, there's a bit of a booby trap question, which is when you're asked to talk about technical depth and balancing functional and non-functional requirements. That's a bit of a sore subject in nearly every development team in the world, often a source of conflict between product and tech. It's not about sort of saying what they want to hear. It's about showing that you understand, preferably with examples, of how it's a balancing act between the two. All right, I think we're pretty much out of time. We've got about 4 minutes. So, tech test. This is where your chickens will come home to roost from your CV. There are various flavours which I'll just talk briefly about. You've got the screening test, which is the one that happened beforehand. I think they're a stupid idea. I have used them and I don't like them anymore. So basically you can practice those online. Now you've got the at-home tests, the sort of the ones where you've had a first interview on the phone maybe. I want to see in those that you can write good solid code, that you understand the problem that's being asked of you, so don't be afraid to ask back, what they mean. And I want to see that you observe good housekeeping skills. So even if you don't normally comment your code a lot, you don't believe in that, comment it in this. Also make sure that you follow sort of good practices around source control management. Act as though you were working in a team project. Don't rush through your solution either. Take a bit of time out to your weekend or whatever to put a bit of effort into it. Because if you just say, I just did a quick hack because I was busy, I'm going to assume you're not that interested in the job. You get the test, which is what we tend to do, Kudu, which is where sorry, this is not this one. This is the one where you're locked in a room and asked for an hour on a laptop and asked to deliver a solution. The best thing you can do in this situation is ask them what good looks like. Ask them what they're expecting to see in their solution. Do they want something that's complete? Do they want something that is beautifully written, or do they want something that's working? So even if you ask them that question, it shows that you're actually thinking about the different criteria. And if they won't give you an answer to that, or you're not sure, then go for something that's working, and tell them that that's what you've gone for. So you need to just be disciplined about making sure it compiles, make sure it runs, and make sure you've got, throughout the hour, you've got something to show at the end. If they want you to just hit a deadline, just make sure you plan your time. If they want something that's really beautifully written, look for clues what they're expecting, like certain patterns, certain sort of architectural choices that they might be looking for example, or a certain coding style. Maybe it's a question about recursion or something. But explain at the end what your approach was. Explain how you made those decisions along the way. Now, the one that we use at Kudu is the observe test. So in this one, you're trying to appeal to the instincts of the interviewer as a peer. You should be write unit tests, maybe even follow a TDD style, observe good concepts like single responsibility, use things like dependency inversion. Now they'll also probably admire your pragmatism if you say, I bet there's an NPM package I could use for that, can I try that? Now they might say no, but it's you're showing a pragmatic approach to solving the problem. If they guide you down a different path, listen to them and follow their advice, but always explain your reasoning as you go along. The whiteboard test, you might think you've dodged a bullet by getting a whiteboard test, but actually it's often harder because you can't hide behind the code. You're being judged on sort of your ability to get fundamental concepts of logic, reason, and computer science. And the key thing here is don't get bogged down in making working code. It's not an IDE. Tell them that you're going to write a pseudocode, or you can write it in your favorite language, but tell them that you're not going to get hung up on semicolons and the like. If they say, are you happy with that? That's usually a keyword for that they're not happy with it. If you can't see what the problem is, what I'd be most impressed by is if you started writing pseudo tests for your pseudocode. It shows that you understand the importance of validating your code and breaking down the solution into smaller problems. Don't be afraid of just scrubbing it and starting again. Maybe think of it as a TDD problem if you have to have a second go at it. Start with the smallest element of a solution and build up from there. And then ask them if you're really stuck, ask them for a clue. Now remember, we're looking for people who are smart and get things done, and that applies to your tech test too. I'm going to stop there because we're out of time. Thank you for listening. I'd be stupid enough to tell you that I'm hiring at this point. If you've got any questions, come and find me afterwards.